Please join me in giving Sandra Randel a warm Pachyderm Club welcome.
Well, good afternoon. What we're going to do first is I'm going to show a brief trailer. It's about 2 minutes long that kind of gives you an introduction to the history of Etzanoa. This was actually done by the Archaeology Channel, and it was funded by V.J. Wilkins, which is a local foundation.
Archaeology is, in its most simplest, basic form, the study of the past.
This is about the highest vantage point that we have here in central Kansas.
Kansas has a rich prehistoric and proto-historic and historic record.
It may be the largest Indian archaeological site in the U.S. and Canada. That's a pretty big deal.
Right here you can see it's coming around, and so the serpent has something in its mouth. It's quite possible this is yet another part of, they call it, ceremonial landscape.
We're really lucky to have this group of people here, all these experts with their instruments. Because although we've known about this feature, this site for a long, long time, all we've known about is what's on the surface.
So this is your unplowed field.
But this is land that nobody's excavated on ever.
Looks like a little trail up here.
For Dr. Blakesley especially, this is a huge dig for him because this is his pinnacle. He's, I found this stuff and I'm tying it together.
When I ran across that, I was so thrilled. I emailed everybody I knew who was interested in the topic, and I said, you've got to read this.
We know the battle was in the southern part of Etzanoa, which is where we're sitting right now.
When they got him back to New Mexico, they got so much interesting information that they took him down to Mexico City, and he ended up drawing a map.
How did they survive? What tools did they use? What did they eat? How did their houses look? By digging in the ground, we can find that. We can find their toolkits. We can test them to find out what they were eating, what they were growing.
We're looking at the remains of what people left and trying to figure out how they went about surviving.
We're out treasure hunting, really. I keep getting the question, did they find anything?
I found it right at the base of this tree.
So our view of the archaeology is radically changed.
In order for things to carry on, I think it's important that our kids know our history.
You cannot know where you're going unless you understand your past.
Do your best to carry on the way your ancestors did. There'll be a connection there, and that'll enrich your life.
It's very exciting stuff for history and for archaeology.
Okay, so this is the story of Etzanoa, which is a lost city. It was discovered in 1601 down by current-day Ark City. So how did all that occur? The time period was 1601. And basically that was after Columbus's discovery, but before the settlement by England on the East Coast. There were no horses in this area at this time, although the natives had seen horses, but they did not have any. The expedition was basically generated by the king. So the King of Spain would allow conquistadors to come into the New World on expeditions. The Great Settlement is what it's always been called. No one really knows where that came from specifically, but that is the name that it's always been called. And today we're talking about two different tribes of Native Americans. One is the Wichita, the other is the Esqueñaques, which were known as the Tonkawa. So the conquistadors began to do the discovery in the 1500s. Onate was the last conquistador. He was the one who was sent on the final mission from the king. Their purpose for doing that was, one, Spain was looking for funding. So they were looking for gold, silver, minerals, that type of thing. The second objective was to convert the natives into Catholicism. So that was the purpose why they came in. We are also going to refer today to something called Cibola, which is known as the 7 cities of gold. So Coronado was the first conquistador who came to Kansas, and he took a westerly route through western Kansas and to the north and ended up in Lyons, Kansas. And that was in 1541. And while he was in Lyons, Kansas, he encountered the Wichita and actually was wounded on the way to Lyons, Kansas. And so he and his party actually lived with the Wichita for about a month. So that was the first encounter with the Wichita. Then Onate came along in 1601. And Onate was sent on the quest for a couple of reasons. One, all of the normal reasons for an expedition, but also in 1595, 2 soldiers had rebelled against the king, and they had taken off to the center of the country to look for Cibola, which was the cities of gold. So Onate's other job in this journey was to bring those 2 renegades back to the king. Now, what actually happened to those 2 renegades is they did reach the town of Etzanoa, and one killed another in battle. They had a small party of about 5 people with them, so all of the members of the party headed back to Mexico, but only one made it, and his name was Yosefe. And Yosefe made it back to Mexico, and so he accompanied Onate on the 1601 expedition, and he knew exactly where they were going, which was Quivira, or the great settlement of the Wichita. So this shows you a map of kind of how things were working in the 1500s. The red represents the area that Spain had somewhat designated for itself. The blue is the French, and then of course the English don't arrive until 1607. So again, Onate, who left the new colony of New Mexico, which is not current-day New Mexico, he took a southerly route across the panhandle of Oklahoma and came up at Etzanoa. Coronado, on the other hand, came up and went through western Kansas to the top. So he pretty much avoided southern Kansas in general. So currently, this is a map of the area that we're talking about in Ark City. So Ark City is famous for where the 2 rivers meet. So this is the Ark River that flows to the west and south, and this is the Walnut River that flows through here. This is the confluence of the 2 rivers, just to the south of Ark City. So what we're actually talking about is the town was on both sides of the Walnut from the confluence to the north. So Onate comes to the area across the river where he gets ready to cross, and he camps for the night. And the Wichita saw him from a scout post across the river camped, and obviously they noticed them because they had horses and wagons with them. So the chief of the town decided to cross the river with a couple of men and do a peace offering. So they took them cornmeal as a peace offering. The encounter was at the beginning very friendly. He found the Wichita to be peaceful and settled. But what happened was, because Onate had been told by the enemy tribe, which is the Esqueñaques, that he had encountered on the way to the settlement, they had told him that he would be attacked by the people of this settlement. So Onate decided to take these 4 men captive. Well, Onate did not realize that one of those captives was the chief of the town. So when the chief did not return, again, they could see them off a bluff from the scout post. They decided to have all the townspeople flee to the north because they were afraid that the chief would be killed. So the next day, Onate crosses the river with the chief and comes to an empty town because all of the people had fled to the north. What Onate did not realize is that the Esqueñaques who he encountered about at the Cimarron River in Oklahoma, had been following him. So when he crossed the river, they crossed behind him. So they were lying in wait for him at the edge of the south edge of the town for him to turn around and come back. So at that point in time, most of the natives in the area spoke Caddoan. Now there were some that had their own languages, there were some that used different ways of communication, but at that point Caddoan and Spanish were the two that were fairly popular. So when they cross the river and come to the empty town, Onate continues on through the empty town. But what he realizes is the houses are close enough together that he can't get his carts and horses and wagons through. So he has to swing way out to the east side of the town to get through. So as he swung to the east of the town, he started to run into trouble. As you can imagine with the Walnut River, it bends, it turns, there's all kinds of things in your way. So he finally got to a point where he had a dead end. So he decided to send 4 scouts out on to the north to see how much further the town went. So they did, and what they came back with was the town lies on both sides of the river. There are approximately 2,000 houses at 10 people per house. Now the 10 people per house came from the number of beds on average that were contained in a house. So that's a population of 2,000. But they never came to the end of the town. They got to a point where they could no longer get their horses through, and they started getting just a little bit nervous that if the townspeople returned, they were highly outnumbered. So this is a picture of a Wichita house at that time period. The houses were made of native grasses and vines. Each house in the center would have a storage pit and or fire pit and or trash pit. And they were mainly hunters and gatherers. The Wichita made it because they thought out of the box. They farmed, and that was the first time that Native Americans really took on the art of farming. Most Native Americans at that time period were nomads, which means they traveled until they found food, and when that food ran out, then they traveled some more. This is a picture of a house, and as you can see, these are the vines that kind of hold it together. And then I always find this picture interesting because this is the inside of a house. Now, that's not your average workmanship. I mean, that's pretty well done. And the Wichita were very good at building houses and maintaining them. This is a picture of what it would have looked like. And the way I describe it is it's like a city block. You would have had a city block of houses. The next city block would have had no houses because farm ground was planted in between each group of houses. So the Esquinaques, again, are waiting at the edge of the town for the conquistadors to return. So he decides to turn back. He goes back exactly the way he came for a couple of reasons. One, it was very difficult to get the carts and wagons through. But secondly, he had to cross the river in exactly the same spot that he crossed when he came over. Because the Walnut River only has a few places where it converges with the Arkansas that you can actually cross with horses and wagons and a lot of personnel. So the Esquinaques guessed that he would come back exactly the way he went. So a battle ensued at the southern edge of the town, and just to clarify, the battle was not with the Wichita, the battle was with the Esquinaques. It was just in the town that the Wichita lived in. So the battle went on for 3 hours. They had cannons. There were 4 cannons on the purveyor's report that indicated that they had with them. It took 7 people 9 minutes to load and fire 1 cannon. So if they had 4 cannons that they were actively using, The Esquinaques quickly figured out that as soon as those cannons shot, they had some time to run at them and shoot bows and arrows and whatnot. The fight went on for 3 hours because the Esquinaques had the advantage of knowing the terrain. And by knowing the terrain, this is where the battle occurred. So what would happen back in the day, there were fewer trees and there was about 4-foot tall native grass. So Onate did not know that there was a valley in there. So what would happen is when he would shoot cannons or they would shoot arquebus at the natives, they would jump down into the ravine. So basically he was shooting over their head, but he didn't know it. So finally the battle dwindled. Onate was able to get his troops out. And by the way, the battle was over the horses and the supplies. Because given that there were no horses in this area at the time, if a native tribe could get horses, then they felt like they could become the supreme tribe. So on the way, he captures 3 men from the battle, and he takes them as captives. And he takes them back and finds out that these 3 men know quite a lot about Etzanoa and the Esquinaque way of living. This is the map. Okay, this map up here has the word Etzanoa, and that's where the name of the town comes from. Nobody knows the exact translation of that word. And by the way, the Z is pronounced an S, so it's Etzanoa. As you can see from this map, Miguel, one of the young men who was captured in the battle, drew this. The circles represent settlements. The straight lines represent trails. The squiggly lines represent rivers. So for about 150 years, everybody tried to orient this map towards current terrain, and there simply was no current terrain that matched it. A lot of these settlements have, like this says Tacona, and the translation of this basically says it's 22 days travel to that particular settlement. So what we're looking into is what exactly were these settlements that they were traveling to? Were they possibilities for trade? Were they other Wichita settlements, or what was that exactly? This big spiel right here basically is from the royal cartographer, and he's attesting to the fact that Miguel, who is the name of the captive, drew this map and gave him the information off of it. This is interesting right over here, because what this says is there is gold 44 days travel from Etzanoa, and we know that's not accurate. So what we suspect is that Miguel added that to the map to throw the conquistadors off and to keep them from going back to the town. Because remember, one of their big objectives was to find gold. This up here is the part that everybody tried to orient to some current terrain, and you'll notice these are all squiggly lines, so those are rivers. So that should have been simple to do, match it to current topography, but that did not happen. The mistake that we all made was we assumed north is at the top. North is not at the top. East is at the top. So when the map was rotated, it matches up with the terrain at Arkansas City. And that was done in about 2013 by a professor from Oklahoma, from the University of Oklahoma. I think the other thing that threw everybody off is the writing on it. You know, if east is at the top, why is that writing going that way? Well, if you read the interrogatories, it does state that when they continued to ask questions and needed more information, they couldn't fit it on the page. So my guess is that they turned it to fit it on the page. So this is the current area of the site. The red areas represent places that we have documentation that that is part of the site. The yellow part is the battlefield, which as you can see is very close to the confluence at the southern edge of the town. This is a map from 2015, and this is what we knew in 2015, the first year of the dig. What we know now is that the town does not stop here. If you remember in the interrogatories it talked about they did not come to the end of the town. That's accurate because we actually flew LiDAR on drones on both sides of the river, and the town goes all the way to Winfield. So the town is much larger than it was expected to be. And of course, those are all things that we're sorting through all the data and trying to figure all that out now. We're currently the second largest site in the US and Canada. If the town continues on to the north past Winfield, because that's as far as the drones got. We didn't say that was the end of the town. That's as far as the drones got. If it actually goes to the north of Winfield, when the drones come back and fly some more, then it will overtake Cahokia as the largest site in the US and Canada. So we've had many digs in Ark City. They actually started in 1896 with a gentleman who was digging a cellar over by our golf course for a new house and fell in a great big hole that had a lot of archaeology things in it. His name was Bert Moore, and Bert Moore is an interesting guy because Bert Moore was a young man at that point, and it created a huge interest in archaeology for him. And so every time something came up about archaeology, Bert Moore was the guy who was there. So that was in 1896. Then in 1898, a gentleman by the name of Charles Good came and did a short dig on a mound near our country club. And he had some interesting things. And again, Bert Moore was right there with him. Then 1915 comes along and we decide to create a golf course on this bluff. Whoops, sorry. See if I can go back. Okay. On this bluff, which is our country club. And there were about 14 mounds there at that time. And several of them got leveled before anybody even realized that there was archaeological material there. When they did, they had some people come in and did some digging and some excavating. And so the country club is where we believe the chief's lodge resided. It's on the highest bluff on the east side of the river. And it's a perfect setup. It's very close to the river. It's perfect setup for ceremonial things. Then came Waldo Wadle in 1940. Waldo was an archaeologist from Newton who went to work for the Smithsonian. They sent him out here with the map that was turned the wrong way and had told him to find Etzanoa, and Waldo found it. I mean, he did a lot of writings. He looked two places. He looked up by the Cimarron River in Hutch, and he looked in Arkansas City. When he dug on the country club, he dug up many, many interesting things out of the remaining mounds that are there. To this day, only 2 mounds remain on that property. I'm going to go back for a minute, I forgot. So in the mid-90s, we put in a bypass around the town. And at that time, so this is the main town of Ark City. This road is the bypass. And so when they put the bypass in, they clipped into the edge of Etzanoa right here. And when they did, they dug up like 118 linear feet full of boxes of artifacts. And if you can imagine, artifacts are very small, so that's a lot of stuff. And of course, that's currently at the Kansas Historical Society, because at that point in time, KDOT owned the property, not the landowners. So then this was in 1601 when Onate came. In 1709, if you're familiar with the Deer Creek or Bryson Paddock sites to the south in Oklahoma, just across the border, these particular sites, the mouth of Deer Creek was the site of a French camp called Fort Fernandina. And that particular fort was put there for the purpose of trading with the Wichita. There were some Wichita living in this area. We don't know for sure if the Wichita had left this area yet or not, but that French fort stayed there for about 20 years or so. If you see up here, these are all of the current excavated sites, and this is an old map. This came from like the 90s. So as you can see, there's a lot of activity right here around basically our country club. So since then, we've added some sites to this. The orange are collections that people have donated to us, that they found in specific areas within the white area. This is just a copy of what some of our data would look like when we do LiDAR, we do laser scans. You know, we're looking for certain elements that tell us where trash pits might be, and in archaeology, trash is king. You know, you can find a lot out about people by looking through their trash. And because those trash pits were compact in the middle of those houses, a lot of that is still there. Now the houses are gone. They were made of vines and grass, but the trash pits are still there. So we have a lot of rock art in the town in various places. We don't know what a lot of it means. The Wichita don't have a lot of history on what it means either. So we're working on securing those. These are some of the artifacts that have been found. This is a horseshoe nail that was found at one of the campsites that they would have camped at while they were in the city. This is a piece of a pot that was pulled out last year. Another piece. Last year we pulled out 2 pots. We call them mama pot and baby pot because of size. One of them had the markings of the Wichita, but the other one had the markings of a different tribe that existed in Texas at that time. So now we know they're trading. We don't know how they were trading, but we know that they were trading. This is a buffalo, This is a buffalo hoe. And then these are some of those same items as you see them in the ground before they were pulled up. This is again the horseshoe nail, and we use a lot of college students who come out in the summers and do the digging. And again, these are pieces of the pots. So future plans. Well, obviously we want to continue the archaeological research. That's of utmost importance. Secondly, what does the Conservancy want to do? Obviously, we would like to preserve the site, but we would also like to allow people to have more participation. So one of the things we're looking at is a property that's fairly close to the country club called Lake Louise. It's called Lake Louise because the owner's name was Louise. It's a former lake that has dried up over time through a spring. Excuse me. These are some additional pictures of it. It's actually a very nice wildlife area. We'd like to create some trails and then eventually have an interpretive center at that location. So the long-term vision is obviously to acquire properties as they come available for sale to preserve the site. Secondly, create an interpretive center. That's probably a ways down the line. Obtain archaeological workspace so that we can get some of those artifacts from Topeka brought back to Ark City where people could actually catalog them and research them. We offer lots of public education programs, which that's in full force. We're always looking for support for the project. We are a 501c3 charitable organization. And then obviously offer additional tourism opportunities. So we do have a website. It's www.etzanoa.com. We have a new exhibit on Etzanoa opening at the museum about the middle of April. We have tours every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. If you're interested, we take you to 4 locations within the town. That would be the overlook where they saw the conquistadors on the other side of the confluence of the river. We take you to the battlefield. We actually take you to the river, and we take you to the spiritual center of the town. And I want to introduce a few people. Dr. Ross is the chairman of our board. And Dr. Crystal Dozier at the back, she is from Wichita State, and she works with Dr. Blakesley. And so I would open it up to questions if you have any.
You mentioned the battlefield, and have you found remnants of pellets or cannonball, or what do you find on that battlefield that tells you that's a battlefield?
I have to go over here and then I'll answer you. We did find remnants of canister shot, which was what they used in the cannons in that area of the battlefield. And we've actually found evidence of 3 of those. So we do know now that that is where the battle occurred.
Hey, this is awesome. What about the language barrier problem? You mentioned the Spanish leader captured those folks and made them draw that map. But what about the language barrier involved, something like that?
Well, Miguel, who was one of the 3 captives who actually drew the map, if you recall, he actually had been born an Etzanoan, or at Wichita. And the story goes from the interrogatories that his mother was killed by one of the Escañaques. And so they took him captive and continued to raise him as an Escañaque. So the reason Miguel didn't speak Caddoan is because Miguel had moved kind of from tribe to tribe. Most of the Wichita did speak Caddoan. Miguel, according to the interrogatories, is the only one who didn't speak or spoke his own language. Now, as a translation, what happened was the people in Mexico City had to scramble to find somebody who could communicate with Miguel. And if you noticed, he drew the map, but all of that writing on the map is the same handwriting as the royal cartographer. So somehow he was giving them the information, and my understanding from the interrogatory is that they had to search and search to find someone who could communicate with Miguel. The other 2 captives that they took back did speak Caddoan.
Your question about the language also brought up another aspect of it in my mind. You know, you might be thinking about this project, why now? You know, why this has been here since the early 1600s, why are we just getting a hold of it? Well, one of the things that was characteristic of the conquistadors' expeditions is that they took priests along with them. And the priests had 2 major responsibilities. One was to do evangelism among the indigenous people there, but the other was to be historians and take down day-to-day accurate descriptions of what went on. And then when the expedition was over, they went back to Mexico City and some back to Spain even, and Sandy has used this word interrogatories several times. They were put through interrogatories. They were asked in detail what happened on a day-by-day basis. So one of the neat things about this whole story is we have eyewitness reports of what happened there. Now, the problem was an awful lot of these reports were in, I think, Castilian Spanish or in a form of Spanish that people couldn't interpret. And what happened was in 2013, I believe it was, anyway, recently, there were some linguistics specialists at the University of California in Berkeley who were able to sort of crack the code and understand the translations to this. And it was from that original translation that they began to pin down the location of Etzanoa, where it is. So and so in the time period since that time, all of this project has been developing. This is a huge story, and I'm just new to the game, so that's why we have Sandy telling the story. I do want to add one other thing that I think is interesting is that I always thought it was what folly it was for these stupid Spaniards to be thinking that there were cities of gold up here someplace. Well, you know, the fact is that one of the primary sources of wealth that the Spaniards found in Mexico was gold. They had found extremely rich gold mines down in what would be now middle and southern Mexico. So, you know, it wasn't really like pie in the sky for them to be able to think about discovering extreme riches of gold someplace. Lots and lots of just little side stories to that are part of the story. So,
And if you're familiar with the Pizarro brothers, who were conquistadors, you know, the Pizarro brothers kind of ruined it for everybody, because the Pizarro brothers were very evil to the people that they encountered. And that's when the king started insisting that these monks go on all the expeditions to document, because he didn't want to get that reputation that the Spaniards were, you know, horribly evil to the people they encountered. So.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the pottery, and I was wondering, what does that indicate about home life, culture, level of technologic sophistication? If you could just riff on what we've learned from the pottery.
We haven't learned a lot from the pottery yet, because we just found it last year. So it's still out being tested and whatnot. The only obvious thing about the pottery were the markings on one of the pots did not match the Wichita. And, you know, Ark City, the area of Etzanoa has a big quarry just to the east of it, where a lot of stone tools were made, and we're guessing that some of those stone tools probably got traded for other items, because not every group of indigenous people had a quarry close by where they had that kind of ability to create tools. So I can't really answer on the pottery yet. I will ask Crystal, do you know anything about the pottery that you could add, or?
How about Fred?
That's an excellent question, and the reality is, because this project is so new, there's so much that we're still waiting to learn, specifically from the pottery and from all of the other archaeological remains. So that's something that I will be working on as I transition into this project, to figure out what they were cooking, how they were cooking it, and how do you feed 20,000 people who are doing agriculture by hand. My guess is that there's going to be a huge wealth of information about the kind of complexity that we see between everyday people and the people who are living, you know, up on the country club with the overlook, and what you eat on special occasions versus what you eat every day. So stay tuned.
We have a question all the way across the room here.
Before that, I'd just like to make one other comment about just a little vignette. You know, I was born and raised in Ark City, and when I was small, every time we had sort of what we call the gully wash, or you know, really hard rain, my mom would say, "Let's go look for arrowheads," and we would go out to the country club, and we would look around, and we would always find some arrowheads. And people that were more vigilant about it than we were found lots and lots of artifacts. And it's fascinating to me to think that for years and years, that, you know, all of these artifacts are being found, and nobody's thought to ask, well, why are these things all here? And so just you don't, you know, I'm a physician, and one of the things they taught me is you seldom find what you're not looking for. And that's a good example of that.
I have two things. One, real quick. Is there a way to look at the photographs of any rock carvings or petroglyphs there?
Yes, I have photos of all of the rock art and rock carvings. If that's something you're interested in looking at, if you'll catch me afterwards, or let's see, is my email's up there. If you jet me an email, I'll be happy to send those photos to you.
And when I worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, part of the geological mapping, colleagues were mapping mineral resources with the different agencies. And in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for example, there were gold mines and gold placers. And so when you talk about these 44 days, it's possible that they may be referring to the places back where they had been at, like in northern New Mexico or southern Colorado, like Elizabethtown, and there's several places where there are gold mines and gold placers just back west. So they may, that's a possibility, but who knows?
Yeah. Thank you.
There's a book that I found very interesting called The Last Conquistador, and it's about the life of Juan de Onate, and from that you can learn a little bit of what she was just talking about, how really Onate's focus of interest was the New Mexico Santa Fe area, and he wanted to be governor of New Mexico. And he spent a lot of time in the being a political organization, you'd be interested to see some of the political issues that he had to deal with in doing that. So anyway, I just thought I'd make that comment.
And you know, Onate was not well liked, as probably some of you know. They cut the foot off of his statue in New Mexico. Well, that's because he was known for cutting the feet off of indigenous people that he would come across. So not everything's perfect, but he was good at the time he came to Etzanoa. So.
You know, that's an interesting point that this raised about the way in which we treat people. I'm curious, where are the Wichita now, the Kiowa, the Kaw, the Osage, all the Plains Indian tribes? Where are they now?
Well, I might have to defer to Crystal, but the Wichita currently, so in 1860 when the government passed the Indian Act, they combined the Wichita with 4 other smaller tribes, and so now they're called the Wichita and affiliated tribes, and they live on the reservation at Andinarco. Now, as far as the other Plains Indians, I can't tell you exactly. I know I have a map at the museum that shows where everybody's at right now. If you jet me an email, I'd be happy to take a picture of that map and send it to you. That might answer it.
So genocide works, correct?
Can I defer? Can I defer that question?
Well, I have a clever answer for that, and that is that sometimes it backfires on you if you're probably familiar with the story of the Osage Indians who got moved from place to place to place, and finally got located in northeastern Oklahoma right before all of the enormous oil reserves were discovered there. They became, for a time, the richest people in the world.
Wonderful.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm currently writing a book about Etzanoa and wanted to bring something up. You mentioned something about findings of pottery that was pretty disparate in, I guess, composition or decoration and stuff. During my studies, I have found, I think especially rice and paddock, if I'm not mistaken, when related tribes settled in an area, not necessarily Wichita, but say Kedowan or whatever, they would segregate and basically do their specialty, whether it was like pottery or bison hides or whatever. And I would posit the reason you're finding 2 unrelated pottery close to each other is basically the segregation of duties, maybe a cousin tribe, the Quivera, for instance, upriver. I might mention, it's my contention that Tenco was actually located in Augusta, and I'm trying to prove that, although it's taken about 200 years to prove Etzanoa, so maybe another 200 years on Tenco.
Well, let me show you something real quick. On the map that shows Tacona, I got a paper from a person in Spain about that. Okay, so Tacona is right here. And the paper that I got supports Dr. Blakesley's belief, and Dr. Blakesley wrote this in a paper, that he believes Tacona is actually the area in Rice County where the Wichita also settled. The paper I got from Spain also supports that theory. If you would send me an email, I would be happy to send you that paper, and you could read that for yourself and see what interpretation you have of it. Yeah, so our understanding is that all of these various settlements, you know, have some relationship to Etzanoa. We're just not completely sure what that relationship is. But if you would jet me an email, I'd be happy to send you that paper. It might help you, but it might not. But that's the general belief by Blakesley, and then this paper supports that belief, is that was actually Rice County. And remember, that map is turned wrong. So that doesn't really make sense the way it looks.
Yeah, the reason I believe that, I've read somewhere basically where the settlements were like a chain of pearls all the way up the river. Well, we have evidence of a large settlement in Douglas. We have evidence of probably a large settlement in Augusta.
Correct.
And we have evidence of settlements on the Whitewater and Walnut all the way to El Dorado, excuse my pronunciation. And that's pretty much my contention that pretty much from El Dorado all the way down the Oklahoma border was basically suburbs of Etzanoa proper, and that it was more like Cahokia building as a regional power center. And let's say they had another 50 or 100 years to survive, you know, that could have been the next Cahokia.
Which is one reason why we talked about that we don't know where the town ends, and that the drones will be looking at flying to the north of Winfield, is that there was a site found in Augusta, maybe 20 years ago? It's been a while, that's been excavated on that we see a lot of similarities. But we don't have documentable evidence of that at this time. So I think you're probably right on the same pathway.
Yeah, it's a matter of proving it.
Right, matter of proving it, and that all takes time.
Well, someone asked about also is there any story that the artifacts have told us, and there is one story that it's just hard to remember everything about all this, but one of the things is that people, you know, this settlement was there, we think, for about 300 years, okay, a long time, from the early 1400s to the early 1700s, and there have been found in other locations as far south as into well down into Mexico of materials that appear to be from Etzanoa and vice versa. So what that tells us is that these people had a large stable base that was there for a long, long time, and they traded far and wide, and had lots of interaction with other parts of the indigenous peoples' settlements and civilizations.
Time for one more question.
Okay.
I'll take the prerogative as the president to wrap up with one last question. You talked about the battle. Any idea in terms of casualties, in terms of the record, and what consequences from the battle kind of flowed in terms of, because kind of having fallen off the map, so to speak, afterwards, this is kind of an archaeological mystery tour.
So the battle, remember that they held interrogatories with the soldiers that came back, they held interrogatories with the captives, and also they had the priest's diaries. So if you read the soldiers' account, they wiped out a lot of Indians, but they had no casualties. If you read the captives' reports, there were a few Indians killed, and they felt like they killed a few conquistadors. The monks' version states that they crossed the river, they had 3 men injured, 3 conquistador men injured. They camped across the river the next day, kind of took care of the wounds of the conquistadors, and then headed back to New Mexico, or to Mexico. What we do know is everybody that left on the expedition came back. So there were no casualties on that end. But whether there were casualties as in deaths, I'm sure there were some Indians wiped out, but you know, sometimes when you're talking about battle and war, everybody's perception can be much different. So I'm probably going to go along with the monks' version, just because the monks had no dog in the fight. You know, they were just there to purely document.
Sandy Randel, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's really wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you.